2017, not so many users, maybe 13 million daily users. Doubled. It doubled in 2020 when COVID started and we were all sent home for work from home. And it's continued to steadily double every year. So 270, they just announced 271 million daily users for Teams. So it's pretty popular. So totally stole this image from Brad Grissom over at Regarding 365, which is a great blog to subscribe to. But this is sort of a concept of where people work or what applications they should be using for what kind of work. And as you can see, Teams fits right in the middle between your work center, your organization, and you. So the applications of OneDrive and Outlook are for you. Then your team, your work center, the people you interact with all the time is in Teams. And then SharePoint is how you can get it out to the rest of your organization. Yammer and Stream and all the rest. So that's sort of where it fits in the what do I do? How do I use this? Yeah, it wasn't that the original slide wasn't for how it ramped up in March, but it could have been. I mean, they went from in 1 month, they went from 44 million users to 75 million daily users, 1 month. So good on Microsoft for keeping the servers running. You may have seen this before, this sort of idea where how do we, for cloud-based applications, for cloud services, I should say, there's a difference between having your servers on-prem where you are responsible for everything from setting up the network to building all of the applications. As you move up, it becomes infrastructure as a service where you share with the cloud provider through platforms as a service, sort of like Amazon likes to push and Google have. And then there's Microsoft 365, which is a full-on software as a service. They handle everything. They're running all the things to keep the applications running, data, operating system, everything is taken care of. You just have to worry about using it. So that's the idea of the cloud anyway, and why it's more than just somebody else's computer. It is the entire set of services. It is designed for being 99.99% running at all times. No need for downtime for patching, no need for downtime for updating or upgrading. That's all handled by Microsoft for Microsoft 365 using virtual machines and data centers. So if we take a look at the actual programming of Teams, then it starts off down at the bottom layer with TypeScript and Node to sort of write the program with, moves up through some JavaScript libraries, jQuery and Angular are inside it, all running through HTML5 and some CSS. And that layer right there, that is your web apps. That's where the web apps stop. So 90% of the functionality happens in the web, right up to where it gets to, like I said, HTML5, that HTML5 layer. And if you have the actual Teams application, whether it's on Mac or whether it's on Windows, then there's additional layers built on for the application that you hit from the start bar. In Windows, it's C++, it's Objective-C. Those are the languages that they use to write the application with. Electron is going to be a way, it's just a presentation layer inside the programming that allows it to work on your desktop, sort of idea. And that's why you get additional features if you use the application as opposed to using just the web-based. There are additional features that Microsoft can build into Teams or any of the standalone applications that they simply can't do on the web-based services. So most of it's going to be the same. You will get some additional different buttons, different things, and that's the reason why. But it also works on phones and tablets, which is a completely different operating system. So for mobile, there's just a slight difference between Android and your iPhone. So most of it exists in the programming that's in the phone application, whether it's an iOS or Android. And so phones or tablets have been able to do a little bit more, maybe sooner. One example is account switching. If you're like me and you have your personal account, you've got a developer account, you've got your company account, you've got your work account, you've got 6 different contracts you're working on, so you got 6 different other accounts, then it's been a hassle switching from one to the other. Now that's going to be built in. It's a feature that's been available on phones for years at this point, and everybody was wondering how come we couldn't get it for the computer version, the desktop version. And one of the reasons was just the way the operating system and the application was built. So that's just a look at how it's different under the hood. So, and this is the logical architecture, sort of the way it's laid out inside, how they've set up all the programming and how they've set up all the modules in there, so that you can sort of get an idea on when I'm doing something, where is it? If it's on the left-hand side of this, it's mostly going to end up in OneDrive. And if it's on the right-hand side of this, it's mostly a group or team feature activity. And so it's going to end up in SharePoint. But it's all mixed together and sort of things. But that's generally how I laid this chart out for this. So on the personal side to the left, right? So you've got chat. People talking back and forth, one-to-one chat, that chat application that's there. You can do recordings. You can have one-to-one meetings or one-to-many meetings that you just set up as standalones. And then there's applications that you can use inside Teams that are just for you, say. Those are going to end up in OneDrive. So it all looks the same because it's just the Teams, how it looks and the look and feel. But there are some differences on where those files are stored and saved. I'm going to demo where you can find all of this stuff at the, after I go through some of these. So to try to show those differences physically. On the right-hand side, if you're in a team or if you're in a channel in Teams or some of the other applications that are built inside Teams, then it ends up being stored in SharePoint, generally in the documents library on the SharePoint team site that is running the team in Teams. So you also have meetings, you also can have recordings, and those are going to actually be stored in the SharePoint library. So other things come in, like some of the calling features and some of the, stickers, giffies, whatever, those are coming actually externally. So they get added in later. But this is just sort of a way to see how it all centers around the user and which place it's going to end up. So, sorry. All right, so this is a little more detailed for all of the, cloud-based features, cloud little boxes that are running, whether it's part of the Microsoft Teams services, the intelligent communication services, or some of the things that are just built into Microsoft 365 at its core, right? So in the boxes up at the top, you can see that those, no matter what application and what language it's running in, those are the things where it's going to end up. Once it comes down, then these are all the cloud services that support the simple little application that runs on our desktop. Right, so there's a lot going on in the cloud just to keep Teams running. It's why you can't just have Teams running on a server or running as a desktop only app to play around with it. It requires all of these things working together 24/7. So in Teams, on that left-hand side of the cloud services, where you've got connections to OneNote, OneDrive for Business, SharePoint, all of the other Microsoft applications, Office applications, right? There are workspaces for all of those built into the cloud. So that's where those sort of connect into Teams, including forms, including Planner, including approvals, like the Teams application for approvals. They all have set spaces inside the cloud, depending on your Microsoft 365 group. Exchange is, of course, is a core service for Microsoft 365, and that's going to be where your identities run from. There's a whole service set aside for keeping track of everybody's most recently used files or applications. When you go to office.com, that is what's displaying, that it's kept track of your activity across all of the members of your tenant. It knows who you are, and so gives you what your most recently used stuff is, as well as keeping track of which messages you've seen, which chats you've seen, which activities you've claimed to have read. So there is a completely different service set aside just for keeping track of what you do. It also, that MRU is also used to feed things like what used to be Delve, My Analytics, but also what's coming out now with Viva Connections, and all the rest. So it's a pretty useful and central part of Teams being in the cloud. So of course, then also on the Exchange sort of ideas, where you keep all your chat, where you keep your calling, where you connect into the public switching telephone networks or PBX, whatever. That's all in a different part of the cloud, not physically, but programming wise. So all connecting through Azure Active Directory as the identity service for the entire tenant clouds. So keeping track of all of the people, all of the users. So then also as well, there's going to be that layer down below, which is, keeping track of all of the information protection, who can see what, who's allowed to see what permissions are going on. Search is heavily involved with that. The search is going to only show you what you're permissioned for. So, which is a great way to keep everything secure and compliant. And then normal email services, normal notifications that you can get on your phone or your desktop. All right, those are all handled by the cloud as well. And pretty much the only thing that goes outside of it is once the Exchange service in the cloud decides to send your email off to the regular other email services through SMTP. So there's a lot of boxes here, but I just wanted to sort of put everything together to sort of show how a little bit how this is all connected. So one of the ways that to put in the cloud thinking, if you will, is phone calls. So troubleshooting phone calls, or sorry, not phone calls, Teams calls. So if you've ever been in a meeting and somebody has a bad connection and you hear fine, everybody else hears fine except that one person, and for whatever reason, their connection is bad and they come through scratchy, they come through broken or whatever, it does not affect, it is not a symptom of the connection to the cloud. Everybody's connection to the cloud is their personal connection. However, your internet is up. I'm on an Ethernet cable to my router through fiber optic. Great, I'm solid. Somebody else might be calling from their phone through a bad 5G connection or a 4G connection. So when you make a meeting or you're doing audio, video through the Teams meeting, everybody's individual video and audio streams are going up to the cloud in separate uploads. Teams and Azure and Microsoft 365 puts it into a media mixer. Everyone's streams are collected. Everyone's streams are put together as one. So that's what comes back down from the cloud. So if one person has a bad connection, you're not going to fix the audio. Oh, everybody turn off your video, because it won't matter. Only theirs is affected. You can, if there is some sort of service issue with the Microsoft Teams, as happens sometimes, or just in general for your area, whatever, then, or you're having a bad connection, turn off the video, because the audio takes up an extremely tiny part of all the bandwidth that's going on. So if people have bad connections, tell them to turn off any video that they might have running to go out. What's coming back down is a small one stream. It won't matter if everybody turns off their cameras, they're still getting the same amount. So just to sort of explain some troubleshooting and what the cloud is providing, it doesn't make any difference for other people. It's really how you talk, how that single user is going back and forth to the cloud. All right, so where is everything? All right, so as I pointed out before, so if it's that, if you're doing chat, or if you're doing one-on-one or one-on, everybody's in a meeting off to the side that they got sent through Outlook or something like that, and then we're probably going to end up in OneDrive, right? So if if you're having conversations in chat, that data is actually all stored in Exchange, and just like email. So because it's has to be personal, it has to be private, it has to be kept secure, it has to be authenticated to the people that are doing it. So that is all maintained by the Exchange service, which is why you simply can't download a copy of the chat that you're using, right? Images that you send into chat get actually stored in the separate media services part, and GIFs are just stored as links from Giphy.com, GIPHY.com. So when someone is reviewing GIFs that somebody might have sent, that's simply, it just shows a link. They don't store the pictures of that GIF or sticker or anything like that. So any files that are sent, if you chat to someone and then send them a file, that file is stored in the sender's OneDrive in a folder called Microsoft Teams Chat Files, and is automatically shared with the person who you're in the chat with. So we'll see that, where it's shared and how you know where it's shared and who has it. So, but if you're ever looking, for where those files are coming from, they're in the sender's OneDrive, which means that if the sender leaves the organization and loses their account, the person on the other side of that chat will lose access. That file will disappear for them. So that's something to keep in mind. If you're in a team, then all of the conversations, again, are stored in Exchange, all the posts. It does not make a copy. There's only one copy of the file when you share it in chat, and that is in the sender's OneDrive Microsoft Teams chat files folder. That file in OneDrive is set to share with the receiver. So that means there's only one file shared with 2 or more people from a group chat. Yep, that's an important distinction to make, because the opposite is if it's in a team. If you share a post in a team, if you file in a post in a team, then that file automatically goes to the Files tab, which is really the look of the Channels folder inside the Documents library in the SharePoint site that supports the team. All part of its Microsoft 365 group resources that are automatically created whenever somebody creates a team. When someone if someone leaves the organization or leaves the team, that file is still there because it's part of the group's resources, not the individual users. So that's where the files are stored in a team. And if you have a group calendar, which you do, and a shared inbox and a shared calendar, those are all part of its Outlook connection, and those are also stored in Exchange. So yes, you have a group calendar as part of a team, but it's an Exchange. And you can look at it through Outlook if your tenant admins have turned it on. You might see documentation that says, hey, when you make a Microsoft 365 group, when you make a team, you make a Microsoft 365 group. Among the many resources that you get are a SharePoint site, a group calendar in Outlook, a shared inbox in Outlook, and a couple other things. But you won't see them in Outlook by default. You have to go back to the tenant admins, and they actually have to run a PowerShell script to activate that shared inbox and shared calendar so everyone on the team can then use it and see it inside Outlook. Meetings as part of Teams. Meetings are big deals. Meetings are a lot of what people use Teams for. So again, if you're in a chat meeting, a standalone meeting, it's a chat with, on steroids. The conversation's going to be stored in Exchange again, same as before, and any files shared in the meeting. You could have 25 people in the meeting, and one person shares a file. That file is stored in that person's OneDrive and shared with the other 24 people. And the link just shows up there. The meeting notes tab that everybody likes to use, that is actually a file stored in the person who started typing that section's OneDrive in a folder called Microsoft Teams Data. And inside that one, there's a Wiki folder. And inside that is the .mht file that shows up on meeting notes tabs. So somebody else in the meeting adds a different section. That file, that .mht file, is now in their OneDrive. Somebody else adds another section. That's in their OneDrive. Microsoft Teams Data, Wiki, folders. So it can get a little confusing, especially if you have a recurring meeting that's been going on for a long time and one person in there that's been adding to those sections leaves. All of a sudden, those sections disappear. So, and if you record video, then it's going into media services. It's going to go through that and goes through Stream for transcription or anything like that. But then it's going to be dumped into the chat here in the meeting, as we'll all see. But then it'll show up actually it'll be in that OneDrive. So, of the person who hit the recording button. So one-on-one, or a meeting that isn't part of a team or isn't part of a channel, most of its resources are going to be stored in OneDrive of the sender or the person who clicked the buttons, so it can get spread around. If you're in a meeting that someone has put into a Teams channel, then yes, the conversations are in Exchange. Yes, the files, yes, the media and everything like that are just the same. But then any files somebody stores in the channel, somebody stores in the channel meeting, gets stored in that channels folder in the documents library of the SharePoint site for the team. If someone uses the meeting notes for a channel meeting, then it still creates MHTML files, but those are now stored in that channels folder under another folder called Teams Wiki Data. It's right there. And they leave, it's still there. And again, with the recording video stream and everything like that, it's all stored actually now in the SharePoint. If you record a meeting in a team channel meeting, it creates a recording folder in the channel. And that's where all meeting recordings are stored for that channel. So, yeah, there's a difference. And it really makes a difference on when you're trying to get at that information later. So, private channels, everybody loves private channels. Yay, private channels. I don't like private channels, but private channels are so very private that if you're a team owner, you might see that there is a private channel, but if you're not a member, then yeah. But team owners, any channel members, and the only other people that can even get anywhere near access to it is the global admins and the SharePoint admins. And they have to add themselves to the private channel to actually get into it. So that's how private channels are. When you create a private channel, so there's inside a team, for the team, there is a SharePoint site collection. And that's what helps power all of the things that are in the team. But when you create a private channel inside the team, it creates a site collection, a SharePoint site collection in a completely different place in channel sites. And up until about 6 months ago, you couldn't even find it if you were a SharePoint, or you had a hard time finding it without PowerShell. So it's not anywhere. It's not a sub-site. It's not a different site under the site collection for the team. It is a completely different SharePoint site in a different section of the cloud. That's something to consider when your organization is setting up retention policies or deletion policies or labeling or security or compliance rules. They have to, because they can have different policies for standard sites and standard channels and private channels and standard SharePoint sites and private channels, SharePoint sites. They do have to consider both if they're trying to write policies for the entire set of SharePoint, which can be difficult, right? So SharePoint and OneDrive handle most of the storage, most of the compliance, most of the search, most of the what do I got to worry about underneath Teams, which means on the admin side, way up high, any policies they put in place for SharePoint and OneDrive, which are actually both in the SharePoint Admin Center because they are both the same thing. But those policies will affect how people can use Teams if they have a very small storage limit set for a SharePoint site. That will affect how much storage you can dump as files into Teams, because the storage of those files counts against the SharePoint site's storage limit. If they decide to keep it big, 100 gig, who cares? But keep everybody's OneDrive storage limits low because they want to prevent people downloading movies into the cloud or something. Then they'll find that they come up against that limit very quickly because they're sharing files in chat. Those files they store in chat count against their OneDrive storage limit. So something to keep in mind. I did have a note about meeting notes and wikis again. They're stored in a different place and they are .mht files. Up until a few months ago, they weren't actually searchable. You couldn't use SharePoint search to find information stored in meeting notes. Even if they were stored in a channel meetings wiki, they weren't available through SharePoint search. SharePoint search wasn't tuned to look through .mht files, mhtml. That's changed. Now you can use it to search. However, when you get the search results, and we'll show this, and you click on it, your browser doesn't want to open an mhtml file because it could hide viruses or Trojans or some sort of malware. So you can't actually open it from the browser, which is where everything else in Microsoft 365 happens. You have to download it and then open it again using a browser, which will then again tell you that you're opening something that might be harmful. So talked a lot, showed a bunch of stuff, whole bunch of tables. These slides, of course, will be available. Now I'm going to end this, and we're going to take a look at what this actually means when you're using Teams, when you are a team owner, what you can see, what other people can see. Okay. So this is me at my fake company here, whatever. This is all just fake. None of it is real. Right. And I am the IT director today. And I've got a team for the people in IT. This is the company's Teams-wide organization. And I work with one other person on there is Megan over here. She's on the IT team as well as me. So we have a lot of chats together, sharing files back and forth with each other. Right. So we do calls, we have our channel meeting in Teams. Okay. And occasionally, of course, we got to work with other people in the company, like Lee. He's in charge of production in the production team. Okay, great. So, as I was saying, so when I've been in chat talking with Megan, say, right, and I'll share files back and forth and she'll share some things, right? We share these files back and forth. So if I go to my files tab and I look in my OneDrive, I see that I have Microsoft Teams chat files, Microsoft Teams data and recordings and apps, folders in my OneDrive, that these were all created by Teams when I started using them. But when I look inside the Microsoft Teams chat files, these are all the files I've ever shared with someone else in Teams. If I go back to the chat with Megan, right? She shared a sample PDF number 1 with me. But if I go to my files, oops, my Teams chat files, I don't see that. I see the one I shared with her, but I don't see her one that she shared with me. If I go to her files and her OneDrive, you can see that that's, yeah. Actually, her team thinks that's the one she shared with me. Now, if I look at it in OneDrive, looks much the same, except now I can actually access this sharing to find out who is this file shared with. Click on it, and if I see under advanced, it will tell me Megan is the owner of the file, and it's shared already with me. So that is where Teams keeps files that people share in chat or in meetings. Right? So we can see that in Megan's files, if I click on Microsoft Teams, these are files that she's shared in Teams, and that the location is actually some of these. So what that looks like in the team meeting or Teams channel, right? These are all the files that have gone back and forth between us. They look like they're in the Files tab. Right? And where they really are is if I open in SharePoint, I end up in the Documents library in the General folder, and that is where these files are actually stored. If I go up, it's just in the Documents library, stored in the SharePoint site that was created for the team. So every time you create a channel, it creates a new folder inside this Documents library. And that is where the Files tab shows all of its documents, because that's where they get dumped into. Right? So that's sort of where files end up depending on the team or the chat. Same sort of idea for meeting recordings, right? So if I'm in a meeting with someone and I start the recording, right? And that would be stored in my OneDrive under recordings. These are the meetings I've had one-on-one with someone where I hit the recording button, and it is automatically shared with the other people that were in that meeting with me. So how that, yeah. So that would be where those meeting recordings are stored if it's a standalone meeting. Let's go over to Megan's, because it's in the IT department, we use a channel meeting. So, right, so here's my channel calendar that shows just the meetings for this channel. Right. And just to see the details, here it is. It happens every other week or whatever. Right. But for those channel meetings, that's actually stored in the recordings folder. I think it might have gone away. Sorry. Lee has a channel meeting just to show what he's doing. I forgot something, but yes. Sorry, 1 second. He has a channel meeting in his SharePoint. So in his Teams. So whenever anybody hits the recording button, it's stored in the recordings folder of the general folder of the documents library. I went looking in the IT. because I forgot the recent things where meeting recordings now have a mandatory expiration date. So unless you change that policy, unless the tenant admins change that policy using PowerShell, then every meeting recording will be deleted 120 days later. You can adjust it up to, you can add 30 days to it or add 60 days to it, but eventually it's going to get deleted automatically. You can make a copy if you move the file to a different library, different place, that meeting recording will still automatically delete on its expiration date. If you make a copy of it to another library, then it won't be deleted. The expiration date does not follow in a copy. It follows with a move because it's part of the file, but it is when you copy it, that expiration date does not copy to the new library, and you can just keep the recording as long as you want. No, documents shared in the SharePoint library do not have a mandatory expiration date unless your tenant admins have set up some sort of retention policy for that. That's not standard, right? Like they might put a retention policy into move or store, or depending on the retention policies of your organization. But any other files do not. It's simply meeting recordings that automatically have an expiration date. And that's because Microsoft checked, and after about 60 days, 99.9% of meeting recordings are never watched again. So to clean up the clouds, they decided to institute a mandatory expiration date for meeting recording files only. They started off with 60 days, but then they went, you know what? We'll let you keep it for 120 days. You can click on, I believe, if you're in the meeting details, yeah. Or if you see, nope, actually, I know where it is now. So when you make the recording, you see this now you see this recording is set to expire. View or change the expiration date here. And if I click on that, as a team owner, it will eventually open up the screen that tells me, oops, that's me making the recording. Is it here? Ah, here it is, expiration date. Let me pause me talking to myself. But this is the expiration date, and you can change it by selecting it, or you could just remove it entirely here. So 7 days, I can extend it by 7 days, 30, 60, 90, or just remove it entirely. And there are more there. So you can, yes, there is a mandatory expiration policy, which can be adjusted by your tenant admins. Or if you're a team owner, you can just remove it yourself. So because it's in a channel meeting, you can do that. The one-to-one meetings, the other meeting recordings, you'd have to go into the person who clicked on the recording buttons the first time and go to their OneDrive, into their Teams files, into their recording folder, and adjust the expiration date there. So, yeah. Let's see, I went over Teams files, I went over the chat files are stored there, the chat recordings are stored there, channel recordings are stored, like I said, in that document library, right? this file, because it was a recording of the meeting associated to this channel, is in the documents library recordings folder. Right? So it all comes down to SharePoint. It used to be stored in Stream. Now it's all stored in SharePoint, available through Stream. But that is where recordings are going to show up. And these folders are automatically created by the cloud. It's not like you don't have to make a recordings folder. You don't have to make another things. If I were to go to, all right. So if we have a meeting and, right, we started keeping track of, we had a meeting in the channel, the meeting notes tab as a wiki automatically showed up for the channel meetings meeting notes. So where even is this stuff? So if I go to the SharePoint site, which is where it is, right? So if it's a channel meeting, it's in the documents library. And I'll go find it. I stuck the word oxymoron in there so I could show off search. And wow, it found it. I'll get to the other one in a second. But if I click on weekly IT setup, it won't let me download. Or sorry, it won't let me just open it. My computer says, wait a minute. My browser says, wait a minute. MHTML could contain malware. Are you sure you want to download this? I'm not going to open it. You need to tell me. So that's not good. So I personally like to use OneNote a lot. And so I'll get rid of Wiki tabs and keep an IT notebook tab or a notebook tab in there, maybe set to a section called meeting notes, because I can keep the same things in OneNote, but if I go searching for it later, or if I just want to open it in the browser, in my Teams, just like everything else is, it just opens because it's OneNote and it's built into Microsoft 365. I don't need to worry about any sort of file format issues. I don't need to worry about where it's stored because it's always in the OneNote as part of the team. So that's my plug for using OneNote instead of Wiki. Wiki is great. It's there. It's kind of simple to use, but so is OneNote. And OneNote is searchable, reorganizable, and you can shift it around. So that's where those meeting notes actually are, though, is in that. If I go back, right, I'll be able to see if I open the folder. That's true. It's a general meeting, but it's kept in a Teams Wiki data library. Right. So it's a channel meeting inside the general channel. So it's any files shared in it are shared in the general folder of the documents library. But if someone takes meeting notes in the wiki of a general channel meeting, it creates a general folder inside a new library called Teams Wiki Data created on the site to support the channel meeting that's happening over in the documents library. Another reason I hate wiki files, because this is where they actually are, in a completely separate and created at need library on the site. If I look at the site contents, we'll see Teams Wiki Data. right? If I were to go, let's see, go back to myself. I think I go to files from my OneDrive, say. I'll see that I only have Microsoft Teams chat files, which are where any files I've shared in Teams are, but also Microsoft Teams data. And inside that is a folder for Wiki. And here are MHTML file that I stored, that I made a Wiki notes on. And it's section by section. Different people create different sections in that Wiki. They get stored in somebody else's OneDrive. So if my account were to suddenly go away because I left the company, the admins way up at the top have to make sure that any data that might be shared with somebody else like that gets stored in a way that is compliant with your company's policies. But if they just simply delete the account and all access to it, poof, all the meeting notes goes away. Poof, any file I've ever shared in chat goes away. So it's sort of everywhere throughout. So when this can become a problem too is, well, let me take a look at my view of, say, a group chat that we were having, where I was chatting with Patty, president, and I sent her a file to say, hey, look, this is what I was thinking about. She decided to add someone else to the chat, but didn't include the chat history. Oops. They don't know the file is even there. They've never even seen it. I've lost it too, because unless I go back to a solo chat with Patty, that's only where that chat and that file is shared. So she added Lee, he threw in this document. I threw in some other documents, but then we changed the name of this. This group chat's getting to be about a topic. So we better rename the chat to something that makes sense. And then I added Megan to it, and I shared all the chat history with her, which means when she sees the chat about new production app, she sees everything back to the beginning of when it became a group chat. Because again, Patty didn't select share all chat history. She just added somebody. And now Megan actually has access to all of the files as well, because I said share everything. So she can download them, she can open in Word, she can get a link to them. But no one can see except Patty and I. If I go back to, let's see, putting up a chat, one-on-one, because here's my history with her. And that's the original file that I shared with her to start that discussion. But because it's in a one-to-one chat that has not been shared, only the two of us will ever know that it's there. So if I go to, so in the other one, just again, to sort of trace back all of the spaghetti strands to where these files actually are and in their singular location, right? I also shared a couple of the sample twos. So if I were to go to my files, which is really going to be my OneDrive, and look at my chat files, I can, and then let's see if I want to open this in OneDrive so I can get to the sharing information. I can see that this file that started it all is, even though it became a group chat, even though it was added to afterwards, even though it says anybody with the link can copy it, it was only ever actually shared with Patty. If I go back and I see the other files I shared in the exact same chat, just different iterations as it kept getting added to, I can see that I've actually shared it with everybody in the meeting now. Oh, but Megan can see it and Megan can get to it. But that's because I shared the chat history and the company policy says sharing links can still, or anybody who can see the link, anybody who has the link, sorry, anyone with the link can edit. That means Megan sees that file because this policy will allow her to open it. And I shared all chat history with her so that the link actually shows up. So she's not been shared through OneDrive with it, but the OneDrive, the general OneDrive policy for the company says anyone with a link can edit it. If your company has great, thank you. If your company has a different policy, then people even who share the chat history won't have access to the files. So, and that was actually, I think it covered everything I wanted to cover. Going in through some of the other things. As far as being a Teams owner and just trying to keep track of where everybody's files are, whether they're in a chat or whether they're in something else. So I am going to go back to the last slide I've got just to wrap it up for this, right? Microsoft Teams is all through the cloud and it's all sorts of places everywhere. But those files are pretty much going to end up in different folders inside OneDrive and inside SharePoint, depending on whether you're in just a chat or a regular meeting, or if you're in a channel meeting or in a Teams. So, and the only way this thing is even capable of running everything is that Azure can keep track of, per tenant, over 60 trillion objects. So, it's crazy in there. So just going to put this up, just fill out the survey. Thank you to the sponsors. Everybody should do that. That's great. And I am going to stop sharing unless there are any questions.
Team, do you have any questions?
I'm not sure where the slides are going to end up being shared, but
we will be posting them out on our website will have a link, and then we post it on our YouTube. We post all the recordings.
Yeah.
So otherwise, I appreciated everything you went over today. I personally learned some stuff.
Good.
But every time you turn around with Teams, stuff changes.
Yes. Stuff does change and stuff changes a lot, but everything is sort of like, even when they did Stream, eventually Stream ended up in SharePoint. The content of the files ended up in SharePoint, or it ended up in OneDrive. Forms, if you have a Microsoft Forms where you allow people to add an attachment, if you create it as a regular personal form or just a regular form as you, those files end up in your OneDrive. If somebody adds to that form, those files are stored in your OneDrive in the apps folder in a question number folder. And that question number depends on the order in which you added it into forms.
Yeah.
However, if you create a form and then instantly make it a group form and then do the attachment things, the files end up in the apps folder in the SharePoint library, documents library for your team, for the group. So it does
there is
all
a logic.
sort of end up there.
There is a logic, but it's just kind of hard getting used to.
Yes.
Especially since they change ever so often. but
Yes.
it is getting better.
Aim for, look at those weird folders that show up in your SharePoint library even now. What's this for? Because that's where they're just pushing everything.
Cool.
So, yeah.
Anybody have anything else?
Yeah. Any other questions? I have no idea where shared channels, where that's going to happen. That's new, that's coming. We'll see. I'm not an MVP, so I'm not in on the.
No.
Ask an MVP about shared channels.
If they can say anything.
Exactly.
Okay. Well, guys, thanks a lot. Elaine Burgum, you are the winner of our $25 gift card. If you want to drop me your email address, I'd appreciate it. If you want, you can just reach out through me through LinkedIn too. Thank you so much for all your time today, Joe. I appreciate it.
Thanks everybody for
having
attending.
People. So thank you much.
All right.
Everybody have a great day now. Okay. Bye, everybody.